The bullet wasn't meant for her. Lilian would understand that later, much later, when the ringing in her ears stopped and the metallic scent of blood finally faded from her memory. But in that moment, with chaos erupting around her at Incheon International Airport and armed men closing in, all she comprehended was the impossible sight before her. Her husband, the man who hadn't spoken more than 10 words to her in 4 weeks of marriage, the man everyone whispered preferred men to women, was throwing himself in front of her. The gunshot echoed through the terminal like thunder. Kang Min Hoo's body jerked as the bullet found its mark in his shoulder, and he crashed into Lilian, taking them both to the ground behind a check-in counter. His weight pressed her into the cold tiles, his blood warm and terrifying against her skin. "Stay down." His voice was a rasp against her ear, rough with pain but steel-hard with command. "Don't move. Don't make a sound. But you're bleeding." Lilian's voice cracked with terror, not of the gunman, not of the situation, but of the realization crashing over her like ice water. "You're hurt because of me." His eyes, those dark eyes that had looked through her for a month like she was invisible, finally looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time. And what she saw there, the fury, the fear, the raw possession stole every breath from her lungs. "Do you have any comprehension of what they would have done to you?" Each word came through clenched teeth as sirens wailed in the distance. "Do you understand what I would have done to anyone who touched you?" Lilian stared at him, at this stranger wearing her husband's face, and thought, who is this man? Because this man, bleeding and shielding her body with his own, was nothing like the ice sculpture she'd been trapped with. This man looked at her like she was oxygen and he was drowning. Airport security and police swarmed the scene. The shooters were already fleeing, and Kang Min Hoo refused to release her even as paramedics tried to tend his wound. His hand gripped her wrist with bruising intensity, his entire body positioned between her and the world. "Sir, you need medical attention immediately. I need to ensure my wife's safety first." His tone left no room for argument. "Check her for injuries. Every inch of her. Now." "I'm fine." Lilian finally found her voice, shaking and small. "But you took a bullet. Why would you do that? We're not even. This isn't even real." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Not real? You think this isn't real?" But he didn't finish because the paramedics were insisting, and blood was soaking through his designer suit, and Lilian was being pulled away for examination while her mind screamed questions she couldn't voice. How did we get here? How did a twin sister standing in at a wedding turn into this man taking bullets and looking at her like she mattered? This story doesn't begin with gunfire and blood and confessions in airport terminals. This story begins 6 days earlier, with a phone call that changed everything, and a sister who was far more cunning than anyone gave her credit for. If you want to understand how Lilian Richards went from standing in for her twin to becoming trapped in a marriage that would either destroy her or complete her, stay until the very end. Because what happens next will leave you breathless, furious, and believing that sometimes the worst deceptions lead to the most unexpected love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because stories like this need your support to keep coming. Now let's rewind to where the trap was set. The thing about being a twin was that people assumed you were interchangeable. Lilian had learned this lesson young, watching her older sister by 7 minutes exploit their identical faces to get out of trouble, skip tests, avoid consequences. Lydia would smile that charming smile and say, "Lilian won't mind. We're twins. What's mine is hers." Except Lilian minded. She minded so much she'd moved back to Lagos 3 years ago, putting an ocean between herself and the sister who treated her like a spare part. Until the phone call came. "Lilian, please." Lydia's voice had that quality that always made Lilian's defenses crumble, that little girl vulnerability that said, "I need you. I'm getting married in 6 days, and I cannot imagine doing this without my sister there. My twin. My other half." "You're getting married?" Lilian had been shocked. "Since when?" "It's complicated. I'll explain everything when you get here. Please, Lily. I know we haven't been close lately, but you're my twin. I need you there." The pleading worked, the way it always did. Lilian booked the flight to Seoul, where her family had relocated for her father's business 5 years prior, telling herself this time would be different. This time Lydia would actually need her for emotional support, not as a substitute. Seoul hit her with that familiar assault of memory when she landed. The humidity, the endless lights, the beautiful, relentless perfection of the city. Her family's home in Gangnam was exactly as she remembered, massive and cold, all marble floors and designer furniture that looked untouched. Lilian. Her mother swept her into a hug that felt performative, like everything else in their lives. Oh, my baby girl. It's been too long. Where's Lydia? Lilian pulled back, searching for her twin. Resting. Her father, Samuel Richards, barely glanced up from his phone. The wedding preparations have exhausted her. You'll see her at dinner. But dinner came and Lydia breezed in 2 hours late, looking anything but exhausted. She was radiant in a silk dress that probably cost more than Lilian's entire wardrobe, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. Lily. Lydia pulled her into an embrace that felt real enough that Lilian's guard dropped. I've missed you terribly. Missed me enough to tell me you were engaged? Lydia laughed, that tinkling sound that always got her what she wanted. It all happened so quickly. Whirlwind romance and all that. Throughout dinner, Lilian studied her sister, trying to understand. Lydia seemed happy, or at least content, discussing wedding details with their mother while their father watched with satisfaction. It wasn't until they were alone in Lydia's room that night that the truth emerged. So, Lilian ventured, settling onto the pristine white bedding. Tell me about him. This Kang Min Hoo. Are you in love? Lydia's laugh was harsh this time, nothing tinkling about it. In love? Lily, don't be ridiculous. This is a business arrangement. A what? A contract marriage. Lydia examined her manicured nails with studied disinterest. Father's company was drowning. Kang Min, who needed a wife to silence certain rumors. We both benefit. Simple. Lilian felt cold seeping into her bones. Lydia, that's insane. You can't just marry someone you don't love. Why not? Lydia's eyes, identical to Lilian's own, held a cynicism that made her look decades older. Love is a fairy tale we tell ourselves to justify poor decisions. This way, I get security, father's company gets saved, and Kang Min, who gets his board of directors off his back about settling down. What rumors? That he's gay? Lydia shrugged, which honestly works perfectly for me. No expectations of actual romance or intimacy. We'll maintain separate lives, put on a show for cameras, and everyone benefits. This is heartless. This is practical. Lydia turned to face her fully. Not everyone gets to believe in love, Lily. Some of us live in the real world where marriages are mergers and emotions are liabilities. Lilian wanted to argue, to shake her sister and make her see reason, but exhaustion from travel and the weight of her sister's jadedness pressed down on her. She let it drop, telling herself it wasn't her life to manage. The next morning, Lilian woke to chaos. She has to leave. Lydia's voice carried down the hallway, sharp with urgency. There's an issue with the Singapore acquisition. If I don't fly out immediately, we lose everything. But the wedding is in 2 days. Their mother's voice was shrill with panic. You have dress fittings, final meetings with the planner, the rehearsal dinner tonight. Lilian, still in her pajamas, appeared in the doorway of the living room where her family had gathered. What's happening? Crisis at work. Lydia was already pulling on a jacket, her face set with determination. I have to go to Singapore immediately. But your wedding will happen exactly as planned. Lydia grabbed her purse, checking for her passport. Lily, you'll handle the fittings for me. Oh, what? We're the same size. Same measurements. Just try on the dresses, pick the flowers, handle the last-minute details. It's all superficial anyway. The important part, showing up at the altar, I'll be back for that. Lydia, this is your wedding. Which is exactly why I need you to do this. Lydia gripped Lilian's shoulders, her expression intense. Please, Lily. This deal in Singapore, if it falls through, everything Dad's worked for collapses. The entire reason for this marriage becomes pointless. I'll be back tomorrow evening at the latest. You just have to cover for me for a day. The manipulation was so smooth Lilian almost didn't catch it. Almost. Fine, she heard herself say, watching her sister's relief bloom. But you better be back. I promise. Lydia kissed her cheek, already moving toward the door. You're the best sister ever, Lily. Then she was gone, and Lilian was left standing in silk pajamas, wondering how she'd been conscripted into wedding planning for a marriage she fundamentally opposed. The next day passed in a blur of activities that felt increasingly surreal. Lilian stood in bridal boutiques while assistants fussed over her, pinning and tucking the most exquisite gown she'd ever seen. She tasted wedding cakes and approved floral arrangements and smiled at the wedding planner's questions while thinking, this isn't even my wedding. The dress was stunning though. ivory silk that flowed like water, with delicate beading across the bodice that caught light like stars. When Lilian looked at herself in the three-way mirror, she barely recognized the bride staring back. "Your sister is going to be breathtaking." The seamstress beamed. Kang Min, who was a very fortunate man. Lilian said nothing, fighting the strange ache in her chest. That evening, at the rehearsal dinner Lydia was supposed to attend, Kang Min, whose absence was noted, commented on, whispered about, not even coming to his own rehearsal dinner. Someone muttered, "The rumors must be true after all." Lilian excused herself early, claiming exhaustion, but really she needed to escape the pitying looks, the speculation, the entire circus of a wedding built on lies. She called Lydia that night. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. She tried again and again. By midnight, with panic starting to claw at her throat, she finally got through. "Lydia, where are you? The wedding's tomorrow." "I know." Lydia's voice was strange, distant. "There's been a complication. The weather's turned, and all flights are grounded." "What do you mean grounded?" "I mean I can't get back tonight. But I'll be there tomorrow morning. I promise, Lily. Everything's going to be fine." The call ended before Lilian could argue, and she sat in the dark of the guest room, dread settling into her bones like ice. Morning arrived with no bride. Lilian was woken at 6 by her mother's frantic knocking. "Is your sister here? Has she contacted you?" They gathered in the living room, the four of them, her parents, Lilian, and conspicuously, an empty space where Lydia should have been. Her father paced like a caged animal, checking his phone compulsively. Her mother sat with her hands pressed to her mouth, tears already streaming. "Call her again." Her father's voice was rough with desperation. "Keep calling until she answers." But Lydia's phone went straight to voicemail. Again, and again, and again. She's gotten cold feet and fled. Lilian heard herself say it, the truth she'd been avoiding. She's run away. I mean, who even does contract marriages in this century anyway? This whole thing was bound to implode. Don't say that. Her mother's voice broke. Don't even speak such things into existence. An hour passed, then 2. The wedding was scheduled for 10, and at 8:30, they still had no bride. "We have to tell him." Her father finally stopped pacing, his face ashen. "We have to tell Kang Min Hoo that the wedding is canceled." "Are you out of your mind?" Her mother surged to her feet. "Do you comprehend what that man will do to us? Do you understand who he is?" "I understand we have no other option. Our daughter has vanished. We'll be ruined." Her mother's voice climbed to near hysteria. "Not just financially. He'll obliterate us, Samuel. That man didn't build an empire by accepting humiliation gracefully. He'll have us deported, blacklisted, destroyed." "Then what do you suggest?" Her father's roar silenced the room. In the terrible quiet that followed, Lilian's phone finally rang. "Lydia. Lily, I'm so sorry." Her sister's voice was barely audible over what sounded like airport announcements. "The weather, it's impossible. I'm not going to make it in time." "What?" Lilian felt the room tilt. "Lydia, the wedding is in 90 minutes. I know, and I need you to listen very carefully. Tell them to postpone it. Evening ceremony, sunset wedding, make up whatever excuse you need to, but buy me time. I'll be there before sunset, I swear." Lilian opened her mouth to respond, but her parents were both staring at her with expressions she couldn't decipher. She put the phone on speaker. "Lydia, this is your father. There will be no postponement. Kang Min, who isn't the type of man who accepts delays." "Then I don't know what to tell you." Lydia's voice had gone cold. "I'm doing everything I can to get there." The call ended. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lilian looked between her parents, seeing something forming in their faces that made her stomach drop. "No," she said, even before anyone spoke. "Whatever you're thinking, no." "Lilian." Her father's voice was careful, measured. "You and your sister are identical." I said no. Nobody would know the difference. "Just for today, just until she arrives." "Absolutely not." Lilian backed away, shaking her head violently. "I'm not doing this. I'm not standing in for her at her own wedding. That's insane. Is it more insane than letting this family be destroyed?" Her mother had risen, her face a mask of desperation. "Is it more insane than being deported back to Nigeria with nothing? No business, no reputation, no future? That's not my problem." Lilian's voice rose to match her mother's. "I've spent my entire life being Lydia's substitute, standing in for her at events, covering for her mistakes, being whoever she needed me to be. I left to get away from that. I'm not doing it anymore." So you'll let your family fall apart? Her father stepped closer. You'll watch everything we've built crumble because you can't manage one ceremony? It's not one ceremony, it's a wedding. A marriage. That's fraud. It's deception. It's survival. Her mother grabbed Lilian's hands, and her tears were real now, raw and desperate. Please, baby girl. Please. Just until your sister returns. You switch in, you switch out. No one will ever know. He'll know. The groom will know I'm not her. Will he? Her father's expression turned calculating. You're identical twins. You have the same face, same voice, same mannerisms. He's marrying Lydia sight unseen, according to the contract. He's never even met her in person, only video calls and photos. How would he distinguish between you? Because people aren't that stupid. People see what they expect to see. Her father pressed his advantage. He expects to see his bride. You show up in a wedding dress, you're his bride. This is kidnapping, identity theft, marriage fraud. Lilian rattled off the crimes, her voice climbing with each word. I could go to jail. We all could go to jail. Or we could all be deported to Nigeria as failures. Her mother's tone had turned sharp. After everything your father sacrificed to build a life here, to give you girls opportunities, you'd throw it away over semantics? Semantics? This is someone's life. Someone's marriage. It's a business arrangement. Her father's voice had gone cold now, calculating. Lydia made that very clear. No emotions involved. What difference does it make if it's you or her? You'll switch back before he ever realizes. It makes every difference to me. The argument escalated, voices rising and falling in waves. Lilian argued, pleaded, tried every angle she could think of, but her mother kept crying. Her father kept painting pictures of ruin, and the clock kept ticking toward 10 a.m. At 9:15, car engines roared outside. Through the window, Lilian watched a convoy of black vehicles pull up to their gate. Expensive cars with tinted windows and an aura of wealth and power that made her mouth go dry. They're here. Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. They've come to collect the bride. Tell them she's sick. Lilian was still fighting. Tell them anything. But her father had turned to her with an expression she'd never seen before. Desperate. Ruthless. The look of a man with no options left. You're going to do this, he said quietly. Because you're part of this family. And families do what's necessary for survival. I can't. Tears were streaming down Lilian's face now. Please don't make me do this. We're not making you. Her mother's hands cupped Lilian's face. We're asking you. Begging you. Your sister will be here by evening. You switch back. No one gets hurt. We all survive. What if she doesn't come back by evening? She will. Her father's certainty sounded forced. She promised. She promised to be here this morning too. The doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like a death knell. Lilian looked between her parents, at her mother's tears, her father's desperation, the 29 years of family loyalty weighing down on her shoulders. She thought about the sister who'd used her as a shield their entire lives. She thought about love and belief and the principles she'd left Seoul to protect. She thought about how much she'd changed in Lagos, becoming her own person, free from her twin shadow. And she made the choice that would alter everything. Fine. The word came out broken. I'll do it. But when Lydia gets back, we switch immediately. Today. Do you understand me? Today. The transformation that followed was violent in its efficiency. The moment Lilian agreed, her parents moved like a military operation. Her mother was on the phone, calling in every favor, summoning a battalion of stylists, makeup artists, hair professionals. The house erupted into controlled chaos. Lilian was swept upstairs, stripped, redressed, painted, and perfected with a speed that felt inhuman. 12 professionals worked on her simultaneously. One person on her hair, another on her makeup, 2 on the dress, others dealing with shoes, jewelry, flowers. They moved around her like she was an object, a doll to be perfected. The wedding gown slid over her body like a second skin. The same dress she'd tried on yesterday, but now it felt like a trap, beautiful and suffocating. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate style, flowers woven through it. Makeup transformed her face into something ethereal, almost unrecognizable. 26 minutes. That's all it took to turn Lilian Richards into someone else's bride. The convoy was waiting. Her father helped her into the car with hands that trembled, whether from relief or guilt. She couldn't tell. Remember, he said as the door closed. You're Lydia. Act like Lydia. Think like Lydia. But I'm not Lydia, Lilian wanted to scream. I'm me. I'm myself. The drive to the church felt eternal and instantaneous all at once. Lilian's hands shook so violently in her lap that she had to clasp them together. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if he recognizes I'm not her? What if there are photos he's seen that I don't match? What if? The church was magnificent. One of Seoul's most prestigious venues, decorated in white and gold that probably cost more than most people's homes. As the car pulled up, Lilian could see photographers lined up, news cameras, curious onlookers held back by security. This wasn't just a wedding. This was an event. Your veil, her mother fussed with the delicate fabric, pulling it forward to obscure Lilian's face. Keep it down until after the ceremony. It's traditional, is it? Or are you trying to hide my face? Her mother didn't answer. The church doors opened, and orchestral music swelled. Lilian took her father's arm because she had no choice, and they began the long walk down the aisle. Through her veil, she could see the guests. Hundreds of people, all turned to watch her. Korean society's elite, based on the designer clothes and jewelry dripping from every visible surface. Business magnates, celebrities she vaguely recognized, politicians. And at the end of that impossibly long aisle, waiting with his back to her, was the man she was about to deceive. Kang Min Hoo stood like a statue, tall and imposing in a perfectly tailored black suit. Even from behind, he radiated an aura of power that made Lilian's knees weak. His shoulders were broad, his stance absolutely controlled, everything about him screaming wealth and authority. He didn't turn as she approached, didn't look back even once. Lilian's heart hammered so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. With each step, her mind screamed at her to run, to stop this insanity, to confess everything. But her mother's tears, her father's desperation, the weight of family obligation kept her moving forward. She reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in Kang Min Hoo's, and the touch sent electricity shooting up her arm. His hand was warm, strong, and completely impersonal. He still hadn't looked at her face, kept his eyes straight ahead with a discipline that seemed inhuman. The officiant began speaking, Korean words that Lilian's rusty language skills could barely follow. She caught phrases, commitment, duty, union, but most of it washed over her in waves of panic. The entire ceremony, Kang Min Hoo never once looked at her. He faced forward with a coldness that should have been reassuring. If he wouldn't look at her, he couldn't recognize the deception. But instead it just made everything worse, more hollow, more wrong. When it came time for the vows, the officiant spoke the words, and both she and Kang Min Hoo repeated them in monotone voices that held no emotion whatsoever. It was a business transaction wearing ceremony's clothing. And then came the names. Do you, Kang Min Hoo, take Lilian Richards to be your lawfully wedded wife? Lilian's blood turned to ice. Lilian Richards. Not Lydia. Lilian. Her own name. The world tilted. She swayed slightly, caught by Kang Min Hoo's suddenly firm grip on her hand. Through her veil, she stared at the officiant, at the marriage certificate being displayed, but she couldn't make out the words from this distance. I do. Kang Min Hoo's voice was flat, bored almost. Do you, Lilian Richards, take Kang Min Hoo to be your lawfully wedded husband? Lilian's throat closed. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what was happening. A slight squeeze on her hand. Painful. Warning. I do. The words came out strangled. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Kang Min Hoo turned to her for the first time, and Lilian caught a glimpse of his face through her veil. Devastatingly handsome, with sharp features that looked carved from ice. His eyes were dark, unreadable, absolutely cold. He lifted her veil with mechanical efficiency, and for one eternal second, they looked at each other. Lilian's breath caught. Up close, he was even more striking, but it was his eyes that held her frozen. Empty, like looking into the void. Then he leaned in, and his lips brushed hers in the most perfunctory kiss she'd ever experienced. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, held no warmth, no emotion, nothing but the completion of an obligation. The church erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, and Lilian stood there, married to a stranger under her own name, and understood with crystalline clarity that she'd been set up. The reception was a blur. Lilian moved through it in a daze of shock and growing horror. She smiled for photographs, cut the cake, participated in all the traditional activities while her mind raced. They planned this. Her parents, her sister, they all planned this. It was during a rare moment alone, escaping to the restroom, that she saw it. A poster on the wall displaying the happy couple, professionally designed, meant to be a keepsake. The face in that poster was definitively hers. Not Lydia's. Hers. Lilian's photograph from her passport, from her social media, carefully curated to match wedding photos that must have been staged while she was in Lagos. She grabbed the nearest wedding program with shaking hands and flipped through pages until she found it. The marriage of Kang Min Hoo and Lilian Richards. Her name. Everywhere. In Korean, in English, in beautiful calligraphy that mocked her. This wasn't a stand-in situation. This wasn't temporary. They'd married her off. Her family had sold her to save themselves, using Lydia's contract as cover, and she'd walked into it like a lamb to slaughter. Lilian felt the room spinning. Black spots danced in her vision. She gripped the sink to stay upright, staring at her reflection in the ornate mirror. What have I done? She needed to confront them, needed to expose the entire fraud, needed to, something, anything. But when she emerged from the restroom, ready to cause a scene, she stopped. Paparazzi lined the venue. Cameras everywhere. Important guests, political figures, people whose attention could ruin not just her parents, but potentially Kang Min Hoo's business. She was trapped by circumstance and witnesses. So Lilian played the role. She smiled. She mingled. She acted like a blushing bride while rage and betrayal burned through her veins like acid. She avoided her parents, knowing if she looked at them directly, she'd break. She'd scream. She'd tell everyone the truth and consequences be damned. But she didn't. Because despite everything, despite the deception and manipulation, some part of her couldn't quite betray them. Not publicly. Not like this. The reception finally ended near midnight. Lilian was exhausted, running on pure adrenaline and fury. When they finally arrived at what was apparently now her home, a penthouse that made her parents' house look modest, she waited only until the door closed before turning on her father. How could you? Her voice was deadly quiet. Lilian, let me explain. My name is on the marriage certificate. My name. Not Lydia's. This was never about her getting married, was it? This was always meant for me. Her father couldn't meet her eyes. Lydia was never coming back from Singapore. She wasn't even in Singapore, was she? Lagos. Her mother's voice came from behind them, small and guilty. She went back to Lagos. To take over your life there while you took over hers here. Lilian's laugh was brittle, unhinged. You sold me. You sold your own daughter to a stranger and made me complicit in my own deception. We saved you. Her father finally looked up, and the justification in his eyes made her want to scream. Lydia has been working for the company, building connections, being useful. You ran away to Lagos to chase dreams that went nowhere. This way, you contribute. You help the family. You do your part. By forcing me into marriage. By giving you security, wealth, a future. Her mother stepped forward. Kang Min, who is one of the richest men in Korea. You'll want for nothing. Except choice. Except freedom. Except everything that matters. Love doesn't pay bills, Lilian. Her father's voice had gone hard. Dreams don't save families from bankruptcy. You needed to grow up and accept responsibility. Lilian stared at the two people who'd raised her, and for the first time in her life, she didn't recognize them. I will never forgive you for this. Her voice shook with the weight of that truth. Never. You'll come to see this was for the best. Her mother's tone held false certainty. Kang Min Hoo won't bother you. The rumors say he prefers men. You'll live in luxury. Eventually, you'll thank us. Get out. Lilian's composure was cracking. Get out of this house before I do something we'll all regret. They left, and Lilian stood alone in a stranger's home, wearing a wedding dress that felt like chains, married to a man she'd never chosen, trapped by a deception she'd helped create. She sank to the floor, designer gown pooling around her, and finally let herself break. The first week was survival. Lilian explored the penthouse like a prisoner learning her cage. 8,000 square feet of minimalist luxury, all clean lines and expensive furniture that felt cold. Everything was perfect, pristine, untouched. It looked like a magazine spread, not a home. Kang Min, who was absent. He'd disappeared the morning after the wedding and hadn't returned. According to the housekeeper, a kind older woman named Mrs. Park, he was staying at his office building, which apparently had residential suites for exactly this purpose. Avoiding me already, Lilian muttered. She tested the boundaries of her prison. Guards were stationed at the building's entrance, not obvious, but definitely present. When she tried to leave alone, they politely but firmly suggested she take a driver. For her safety, she was being watched. Carefully, respectfully, but watched nonetheless. Rage gave way to panic. Lilian called her sister's number obsessively. Every call went straight to voicemail. Lydia had disappeared, was probably living Lilian's life in Lagos, free and unburdened while Lilian rotted in a golden prison. She considered going to the authorities, reporting the fraud, exposing everything. But reality set in quickly. She'd said, "I do" of her own apparent free will, in front of hundreds of witnesses. The marriage was legal. How could she prove she'd been tricked without destroying everyone, including herself? The emotional spiral was vicious. Anger at her family, at Lydia, at herself for being so naive. Fear of what this marriage meant. What would happen when Kang Min Hoo decided to acknowledge her existence? Grief for the life she'd lost, the autonomy stolen in a single morning. And underneath it all, a desperate, clawing need to escape. 10 days in, Kang Min Hoo finally came home. Lilian was in the living room, attempting to read, but mostly staring at pages without comprehension, when she heard the door open. He walked in like he owned the place, which he did, his presence immediately dominating the space. Still in a business suit despite the late hour, his tie loosened, exhaustion evident in the tight lines around his eyes. They stared at each other across the room. "You've been avoiding this home," Lilian said. Pleased her voice came out steady instead of accusing. "I've been occupied with work. For 10 days straight? Is there an issue with that?" His tone was clipped, professional. "You have access to everything you need. Mrs. Park ensures the household runs smoothly. I fail to see the problem. The problem is we're married and you act like I don't exist. We are legally bound by a contract." He moved to pour himself a drink, whiskey from a crystal decanter that probably cost more than a car. "Beyond that, I have no expectations of this arrangement. You have your space, I have mine. It's efficient." "Efficient," Lilian repeated flatly. What a romantic way to view matrimony. Romance wasn't part of the agreement. His eyes met hers, cold and assessing. Was it? Lilian wanted to scream that there was no real agreement, that she'd been tricked, that none of this was what she'd chosen. But something held her back. Maybe self-preservation. Maybe the knowledge that confessing would accomplish nothing except potential legal consequences. "I want separate sleeping arrangements clearly established," she said instead. "I want my own space that you don't enter without permission. I want the ability to come and go as I please without an escort. Can you provide those things?" Kang Min Hoo studied her for a long moment. "The first two, yes. The third, no. No. You're my wife now." His expression didn't change. "That makes you a target for anyone seeking leverage against me or Kang Industries. The security isn't negotiable. So I'm a prisoner. You're protected. There's a distinction. Not from where I'm standing." Kang Min Hoo's jaw tightened, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. "Think what you will. The security remains." He left the room without another word, disappearing into what she assumed was his private suite, and Lilian was alone again. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Kang Min Hoo would disappear for days at a time, consumed by work that apparently never ended. When he was home, they existed like ghosts in the same space, acknowledging each other with bare minimum courtesy before retreating to separate corners. He never touched her, never looked at her for longer than necessary, never showed any interest whatsoever in the woman he'd married. The rumors must be true, Lilian thought bitterly. He really doesn't want a wife, just the appearance of one, which should have been a relief. Should have made this easier. Instead, it made everything worse. The loneliness was crushing. She was trapped in a gilded cage with a husband who treated her like expensive furniture, cut off from her old life, living a lie she never agreed to. Lilian tried to build routines. She enrolled in advanced Korean courses, determined to master the language. Started taking online business classes, working toward the MBA she'd always wanted. Explored Seoul during the day with her mandatory security detail trailing at a respectful distance. But nothing filled the hollow ache inside her. 3 weeks into the marriage, she snapped. She'd spent the day planning, studying the penthouse's layout, the security rotations, the blind spots in coverage. Mrs. Park had mentioned that Kang Min, who would be traveling to Busan for a conference, would be gone for 3 days. 3 days was enough time to disappear. Lilian packed a small bag with essentials. took cash she'd carefully saved from the household allowance Mrs. Park provided, found her passport where it had been placed in a desk drawer, ready and waiting. The plan was simple. Slip out during the early morning shift change when security was most relaxed. Take the stairs instead of the elevator to avoid cameras. Exit through the building's service entrance. Disappear into Seoul's metro system. Make her way to Incheon Airport. Buy a ticket to Lagos with cash. Be gone before anyone realized. At 4 in the morning, Lilian put her plan into motion. She made it out of the penthouse. Down 8 flights of stairs, her heart pounding with each step. Through the service entrance that Mrs. Park had shown her once when accepting a furniture delivery. Out into Seoul's pre-dawn streets. Freedom was meters away. She could taste it. Then her phone rang. She should have left it behind, but some foolish part of her couldn't quite sever all ties. She'd kept it, and now it was ringing with an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Mrs. Kang. The voice was unfamiliar, male, speaking English with a slight accent. You should return to your residence immediately. Who is this? Someone invested in your well-being. You're being watched. There are individuals who would very much like to intercept you before you reach the airport. For your own safety, I suggest you go back. Lilian's blood ran cold. Is this a threat? It's a warning. You're more valuable than you realize, and not everyone's intentions are benign. The call ended. Lilian stood frozen on the empty street, paranoia and logic warring in her mind. Was it real? A manipulation to keep her trapped? Then she saw them. 2 men across the street, watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Not her usual security detail. These were different. Harder. Dangerous. Her phone rang again. This time, Kang Min Hoo's name flashed across the screen. Where are you? His voice was steel. How did you? I have the penthouse monitored. He cut her off. Location services on your phone. I know exactly where you are. And I know you're attempting to run. I'm leaving. Lilian forced strength into her voice she didn't feel. This marriage is a fraud, and I'm ending it. By running into danger? There are people watching you right now who aren't my security. His tone sharpened. People who would take pleasure in using you against me. I don't believe you. Then believe this. You take one more step toward that metro station, and I won't stop you. But when something happens, when you realize this world is more dangerous than you comprehend, don't expect rescue. The line went dead. Lilian looked at the men still watching her. Looked at the metro entrance just a block away. Looked at her phone, her passport, her chance at freedom, and made a choice she'd regret and be grateful for in equal measure. She turned back. The walk to the penthouse felt eternal. The men across the street followed at a distance, never approaching but always present. By the time she reached the building, dawn was breaking, and she was shaking with adrenaline and fear. Kang Min, who was waiting in the living room when she entered, still in his conference suit, looking like he'd driven back from Busan at dangerous speeds. His expression was thunderous. Sit down. I'd rather stand. That wasn't a request. The command in his voice made her knees weak. Sit down. Lilian sat, mostly because her legs were threatening to give out anyway. Kang Min, who paced in front of her, a caged predator barely containing rage. Do you have any comprehension of how reckless that was? Of what could have happened? I was trying to escape a prison. This isn't a prison. It's protection. He stopped, facing her directly. There are 3 rival companies currently attempting hostile takeovers of Kang Industries. 2 have connections to organized crime. All of them would jump at the opportunity to acquire leverage through my wife. Then you shouldn't have a wife. Too late for that now. His voice dropped, going cold. You married me. Legally, publicly, irrevocably. You wear my name. You live in my home. Whether you like it or not, you're bound to me, and that makes you a target. I never wanted this. Do you think I did? The question came out harsh. You think I wanted a wife thrust upon me, a contract negotiated by my board of directors, a marriage to save appearances? Then let me go? Lilian stood, meeting his eyes. Divorce me. Annul this. Whatever it takes. Let me go back to my life. What life? Kang Min, who stepped closer, and the intensity in his gaze pinned her in place. The life where your family sold you to settle their debts? Where your twin sister is currently living in your apartment, using your credentials, pretending to be you. How do you know about Lydia? I know everything. His smile was sharp, cutting. I knew from the beginning that you weren't the woman in the contract. Did you honestly believe I couldn't distinguish between you? The world tilted. You knew? From the moment you walked down that aisle. His eyes held hers. Your walk is different from your sister's. You hold yourself differently. You have a small scar near your right eyebrow that she lacks. You bite your lower lip when nervous, which she doesn't. Should I continue? If you knew, why didn't you stop the wedding? Because the contract was with the Richards family, and it didn't matter which daughter fulfilled it. His tone was matter-of-fact, brutal in its honesty. Lydia or Lilian, the outcome was the same. A wife for appearances. A solution to persistent rumors. The end of questions about my personal life. So you just let me walk into a trap. I let you make your own choices. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to identify. You agreed. You said the words. No one forced them from your lips. My family manipulated me. And yet you're an adult capable of saying no. He leaned back slightly, studying her. You want to paint yourself as a victim, Lilian. But the truth is more complex. You made choices, perhaps under pressure, perhaps without complete information, but you made them nonetheless. The words hit like physical blows because they held uncomfortable truth. I still want out, she whispered. That's not an option. Kang Min Hoo's finality was absolute. We're married. In the eyes of Korean law, Korean society, and both our families. Divorce would be catastrophic for both of us. I won't allow it. You can't keep me prisoner. I can keep you safe. There's a distinction. His jaw tightened. Those men watching you this morning? One works for the Choi Corporation, which is attempting a hostile acquisition. The other is connected to a crime syndicate interested in securing leverage. Both would have taken you before you reached the airport. Both would have used you to extract concessions, money, corporate secrets. Is that the freedom you're seeking? Lilian felt sick. You're lying. I'm telling you reality. He pulled out his phone, showed her photographs of the men she'd seen, along with detailed profiles that looked official. This world isn't kind to weakness, and right now, you are perceived as mine. That makes you valuable. That makes you vulnerable. She stared at the evidence, at the brutal truth of her situation, and felt the last of her escape plans crumble. So what do I do? Her voice broke. Just accept this? Live as your decorative prisoner forever? You could try trusting me. The suggestion came out stiff, like he wasn't used to making such offers. Accept that while this marriage wasn't what either of us chose, we're bound together now. We can make it tolerable. Or we can make each other miserable. The choice is partially yours. Partially, I control security and finances. You control everything else. How we interact, how we structure our lives, whether we're civil or constantly at war. That's up to you. Lilian wanted to rage, to fight, to reject everything he was saying. But exhaustion was setting in, and with it, a cold understanding of her options. She had none. I want to contact my sister, she said finally. I want to speak with Lydia. No. The flat refusal shocked her. Why not? Because your sister orchestrated this entire deception. She doesn't deserve your forgiveness or your attention. His expression hardened. She took your life because she didn't want the responsibility of this marriage. She's a coward. You owe her nothing. She's still my family. Family that betrayed you. Kang Min, whose voice was cold. But if you insist on torturing yourself with her voice, I won't stop you. Just don't expect me to provide the means. Fine. Lilian lifted her chin. Then I want access to my own money. Not an allowance. My own accounts. Agreed. I'll have my financial manager set it up. And I want one day a week where I can go anywhere without security following me. Absolutely not. Then we have nothing more to discuss. Lilian turned toward her room. His hand caught her wrist, the first time he'd touched her since the obligatory wedding kiss. The contact sent electricity through her skin. Wait. She stopped but didn't turn around. One afternoon per month, he said carefully. In a public place of your choosing. My security will maintain distance, but will still be present. That's my final offer. Fine, Lilian agreed. He released her immediately, stepping back like her touch burned. Get some rest, he said. You look exhausted. Then he left, and Lilian stood alone in the living room, understanding with crystalline clarity that this was her life now. This half-existence with a man who knew her secrets, controlled her movements, and treated her with cold calculation instead of warmth. She'd traded one trap for another. The following weeks were strange. Kang Min, who kept his distance, but was more present than before. He came home for dinner occasionally, though they ate in silence. He asked perfunctory questions about her day. He ensured she had everything she needed materially while providing nothing emotionally. But something had shifted. Lilian caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't aware. caught glimpses of something in his expression that looked almost like curiosity or concern. She couldn't quite identify it. She stopped trying to escape, understanding now that freedom wasn't geographical. She was bound by circumstances bigger than location. Instead, she focused on building a life within her constraints. Her Korean improved rapidly. Her online courses progressed. She found small pleasures, a cafe that made decent tea, a bookstore with English novels, a park where she could sit and pretend she was somewhere else. Mrs. Park became an unexpected ally, teaching Lilian Korean cooking and sharing gossip about the household with gentle humor. "You're different from what I expected," Mrs. Park said one afternoon while they prepared dinner together. "How so?" "The master's previous almost bride. Before your contract, she was cold, calculating, interested only in wealth and status. You seem almost human." Lilian laughed bitterly. "That's a low bar. Perhaps. But in this world, it's notable." A month passed, then another. The marriage settled into routine, cold and manageable. Lilian convinced herself she could survive this, that she could build a tolerable existence within her golden cage. Then Kang Min, who came home one evening with an announcement. "We're traveling to Hong Kong tomorrow for a business conference. Pack for 3 days." Lilian looked up from her book. "I wasn't invited to this." "You're my wife. You're always invited." His tone left no room for argument. "The conference includes social events where spouses are expected. You'll attend. And if I refuse, then you'll sit in this penthouse for 3 more days while I'm gone. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice, but Lilian recognized the concession for what it was. An opportunity to leave Seoul, even temporarily. She'd take it. "Fine. When do we leave?" 6 a.m. "Be ready." The trip to Hong Kong was Lilian's first taste of Kang Min Hoo's professional world. The conference was held at a luxury hotel that made their penthouse look modest. Business executives from across Asia gathered for panels, negotiations, networking events that felt more like war than socializing. And through it all, Kang Min Hoo transformed. The cold, distant man she lived with became someone else entirely. Charming when needed, ruthless when required, commanding every room he entered with effortless authority. He was fascinating, terrifying, completely in his element. At the first social dinner, Lilian played her role. Beautiful, demure wife standing beside her powerful husband. She smiled at strangers, made polite conversation in her improving Korean, and projected an image of contentment she didn't feel. Kang Min Hoo's hand rested on her lower back throughout the evening. Light, impersonal, but constant. A claim of ownership that made her skin prickle with complicated emotions. "You're doing well," he murmured at one point, his breath warm against her ear. "Better than expected." "High praise," she muttered back. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. The second day, after a long series of meetings, Kang Min Hoo suggested they have dinner alone instead of attending another networking event. "You don't have to babysit me," Lilian said as they settled into a private restaurant overlooking Victoria Harbor. "It's not babysitting." He studied the menu with careful attention. "It's exhausting maintaining appearances constantly. I thought we could both use a reprieve." They ordered, and for the first time since the wedding, had an actual conversation. Small at first. Comments about Hong Kong, observations about the conference, safe topics that didn't venture into dangerous territory. But then Kang Min Hoo asked, "What were you studying in Lagos?" Before all this happened, business administration. Lilian toyed with her wine glass. "I wanted to get my MBA, maybe start my own consulting firm eventually. Help Nigerian businesses expand internationally." "Why consulting?" "Because I watched my father struggle to navigate international markets. Watched good businesses fail because they didn't understand cultural nuances or regulatory frameworks. I thought I could bridge that gap." "It's a solid vision." His eyes held genuine interest. "Well thought out." "It was," Lilian corrected. "Past tense." "Why past tense?" "Because that life is gone." She met his gaze. "You know this. I'm trapped playing a role in your world now. The life isn't gone." Kang Min Hoo leaned back. "Delayed perhaps, but not eliminated. You could still pursue your MBA. Still build toward consulting. Nothing about being married to me prevents professional ambitions. Except time, resources, freedom. You have all 3. His certainty was infuriating. "You have access to my money, which removes financial barriers. You have time, as I'm rarely home. And you have freedom within reasonable security constraints. The only thing stopping you is yourself." The words stung because they held truth she didn't want to acknowledge. Why would you support that? Lilian asked quietly. Why would you want a wife with her own career? Because a wife who feels trapped becomes resentful. A wife with purpose is content. And content is more manageable than resentful. His pragmatism was brutal but honest. Also, intelligence is attractive. I married you because I had to, but I prefer not to be married to someone who wastes their potential wallowing in victimhood. That's harsh. It's honest. Would you prefer pretty lies? Lilian stared at him, at this complicated man who trapped her but was now offering her pieces of freedom, who treated her with cold calculation but seemed to want her to thrive anyway. I don't know what to make of you, she admitted. The feeling is mutual. Something almost vulnerable flickered in his expression before his usual mask descended. But we have time to figure each other out. We're bound together for the foreseeable future. Might as well make it bearable. It was the closest thing to kindness he'd offered, and Lilian didn't know how to respond. The third day of the conference, everything changed. Lilian had spent the morning alone, exploring Hong Kong streets with her security detail, maintaining respectful distance. She'd bought books, tried street food, soaked in the freedom of a different city where no one knew or cared who she was. She was supposed to meet Kang Min Hoo back at the hotel at 3 for their return flight to Seoul. She arrived at Chek Lap Kok Airport early, settling into the VIP lounge to wait. That's when she noticed them. Men watching her. Different from her security detail. Harder. More predatory. The same feeling she'd had that morning in Seoul when she'd tried to escape. Lilian's heart rate spiked. She pulled out her phone, about to call Kang Min Hoo, when the power went out. The airport plunged into chaos. Emergency lights kicked in, but panic spread quickly. In the confusion, rough hands grabbed Lilian, dragging her away from the lounge. She tried to scream, but a hand clamped over her mouth. Tried to fight, but there were too many of them. They pulled her through service corridors, away from crowds, toward exits that led to waiting vehicles. This is it, Lilian thought with icy clarity. This is how I die. Then gunshots rang out. The hands released her as her captors scattered. Lilian hit the ground hard, her ears ringing, her mind struggling to process what was happening. More gunshots, shouting in Korean and Cantonese. The sharp crack of violence echoing through concrete corridors. Stay down. The command came from behind her. Lilian, stay down. She knew that voice. Kang Min Hoo appeared like something from a nightmare, moving with lethal precision through the chaos. He wasn't alone. His security detail, armed and deadly, had transformed from subtle shadows into active defenders. But he was the most terrifying. Gone was any pretense of civilized businessman. This was someone else entirely. Someone dangerous. Lilian watched in frozen shock as he fought his way to her, taking down one attacker with brutal efficiency. A gun fired, and Kang Min Hoo jerked, stumbling. Blood bloomed across his shoulder. No. The word ripped from Lilian's throat. But he didn't stop. Didn't even slow. He reached her, his body becoming a shield between her and the remaining threats, even as blood soaked through his shirt. Don't move, he gritted out, and she could hear the pain he was suppressing. Whatever happens, stay behind me. Airport security and police were arriving, sirens wailing. The attackers realized they'd lost and retreated. Within minutes, the corridor was secure, and medics were rushing toward them. But Kang Min Hoo wouldn't let them near until he'd checked Lilian himself. His hands, one slick with his own blood, ran over her face, her arms, her body, checking for injuries with desperate thoroughness. Did they hurt you? His voice was rough, raw. Lilian, answer me. Did they hurt you? I'm fine. Tears were streaming down her face, shock setting in. But you're bleeding. You're shot. It's superficial. He tried to dismiss it, but his face was pale, strained. You're certain you're unharmed? Why did you do that? Lilian's hands hovered over his wound, terrified to touch, but desperate to help. Why would you take a bullet for me? Because you're mine. The words came out fierce, absolute. My wife. My responsibility. Mine to protect. But the rumors say you don't even like women. This marriage isn't real. Why would you risk yourself for someone you don't even want? Kang Min Hoo stared at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his carefully constructed walls crumbled. Who told you I don't want you? His voice dropped to something raw and honest. The rumors are convenient lies I've maintained for years to avoid relationships I wasn't ready for. But you, his jaw clenched. I've wanted you from the moment you walked down that aisle. Wanted you and hated myself for it because I knew you were trapped, knew you hadn't chosen me, knew every touch would be violating consent you never gave. Lilian couldn't breathe. What? The medics were insisting now, trying to access his wound. Kang Min Hoo finally allowed them to, but his eyes never left hers. I've kept my distance because it was the only decent thing I could do. Because I knew you were angry and betrayed and trapped by circumstances. Because every instinct screamed at me to make this marriage real, but I couldn't do that to you. His expression twisted with pain, physical and emotional. But seeing those men grab you, seeing you in danger, I realized something. I realized that decent doesn't matter when you're about to lose what you never properly claimed. I realized I'd burn this entire world down before I let anyone harm you. The confession hung between them, raw and devastating. You took a bullet for me, Lilian whispered. I'd take 1,000 bullets for you. His intensity was frightening. I'd do anything for you. And I know that's not fair. I know you didn't choose this, didn't choose me. But it's the truth. You're my wife, Lilian. Mine. And I protect what's mine. Sir, we need to get you to a hospital. The medic's voice broke through. Kang Min Hoo finally looked away, allowing them to work. But his hand found Lilian's, gripping tight enough to hurt. Don't leave me, he said quietly. I know I have no right to ask, but please don't leave me. Lilian looked at their joined hands, at the blood, at the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. This man who'd been her captor, her jailer, her cold, distant husband had just risked everything to save her. Had confessed feelings she'd never imagined he possessed. And she realized something terrifying. She didn't want to leave either. I'm not going anywhere, she heard herself say. His grip tightened, and for just a moment, relief flickered across his features before the medics took him away. Lilian sat in the corridor, surrounded by security and police, covered in Kang Min Hoo's blood, and understood that everything had just changed. The marriage she'd despised, the man she'd resented, the trap she'd fought against, it was all suddenly, terrifyingly, impossibly different. And she had no idea what to do with that realization. The hospital was a blur of activity. Kang Min Hoo was rushed into surgery while Lilian sat in a private waiting room, his blood still drying on her clothes, her mind replaying his words on an endless loop. I've wanted you from the moment you walked down that aisle. I'd burn this entire world down before I let anyone harm you. You're mine. His security team surrounded her, grim-faced and professional. The head of security, a man named Lieutenant Zhang, provided updates in careful English. The bullet passed through without hitting major vessels. He'll make a full recovery. Who were those men? Lilian's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Representatives from the Choi Corporation. They intended to kidnap you for ransom and leverage. Lieutenant Zhang's expression was severe. Mr. Kang had intelligence about a potential threat, which is why he arrived early. He was attempting to extract you before they could act. He knew I was in danger. He always knows. Lieutenant Zhang's respect for his employer was evident. Mr. Kang monitors every potential threat to his assets. You, Mrs. Kang, are considered his most valuable asset. The words should have made her feel like property. Instead, they made her feel protected. Hours passed. Lilian sat in silence, processing everything, until finally a doctor emerged with news that the surgery was successful. Kang Min, who was in recovery, and asking for her. She was led to a private room where he lay against white sheets, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale but alert. His eyes found hers the moment she entered, tracking her movement with an intensity that made her breath catch. You stayed, he said quietly. I said I would. People don't always keep their word. His guard was down, whether from pain medication or emotional exhaustion, she couldn't tell. I wasn't certain you meant it. Lilian approached the bed slowly. I'm learning that I mean more than I thought I did. They stared at each other, the air between them thick with everything unsaid. The rumors about you, Lilian started carefully. You said they were convenient lies. They were. Kang Min, whose expression was open in a way she'd never seen. I've never been attracted to men. I've simply never wanted the complications of relationships. My parents destroyed each other with their volatile marriage. Love made them weak, made them hurt each other repeatedly. I witnessed that destruction and decided I wanted no part of it. So you let people believe you were gay. It was easier than constantly rejecting advances and explaining that I simply wasn't interested in romantic entanglements. His jaw tightened. Until you. What changed? You were different from the beginning. He held her gaze. I expected someone like your sister. Someone calculating, cold, interested only in wealth. But you fought. You challenged. You looked at me with anger instead of greed. And when I touched you during the wedding, when I kissed you, I felt something I'd convinced myself I was incapable of feeling. What did you feel? Want. Pure and consuming. The admission seemed to cost him. I wanted to make the kiss last. Wanted to hold you beyond what was required. Wanted to claim what was legally mine, but morally wrong to take. So I did the only thing I could. I stayed away. You've been avoiding me to avoid wanting me. I've been avoiding you to avoid becoming the villain of your story. His voice roughened. You didn't choose me, Lilian. You were tricked, manipulated, sold into this marriage. Taking advantage of that, acting on what I felt, would make me no better than the people who deceived you. The revelation hit her like a physical force. All this time, she'd thought his coldness meant indifference. Instead, it had been restraint. What if I told you, Lilian said slowly, carefully, that while I didn't choose this marriage, I'm beginning to understand there are different types of choice. He went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying that you took a bullet for me today. I'm saying that you've given me freedom within constraints, supported my education, protected me from dangers I didn't even know existed. I'm saying that maybe the man I married isn't the villain I thought he was. Lilian. His voice was barely a whisper. I'm not saying I've forgiven my family. I'm not saying this situation is ideal. But I am saying, she moved closer until she was standing right beside his bed, that maybe we could try actually being married instead of just existing in the same space. You don't owe me that. I know. But maybe I want to. His hand reached for hers, careful despite the foreline. You're certain? No. Lilian threaded her fingers through his. I'm terrified. But I'm also tired of running from something that might not be the prison I thought it was. Kang Min Hoo pulled her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a reverence that made her chest ache. I'll spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the fairy tale Lilian had once dreamed of. But standing in that hospital room, holding hands with a man who'd bled for her, she thought maybe it could be something better. Something real. Then the door burst open, and someone with a face that looked like hers burst in. Lydia. Kang Min Hoo. Are you okay? I came immediately I heard about the accident. Lilith stiffened at the sight before her, and in the next minute her sister had taken his hands from her hand into hers, while Kang Min, who just stared in shock. Husband snatcher, I think I finally need my man back. Make sure you like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that will wreck you in the best way. Drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Your support keeps these stories alive, and I read every single comment. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next in Lilian and Kang Min Hoo's story, because this is just the beginning. Their journey from contract to consuming love is about to get even more intense, especially when her twin needs him back. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.